this December 7th through 9th. Check out the EdUp Experience podcast live and in person in Doha, Qatar for the World Innovation Summit on Education. We will be documenting the ideas and innovations from today's most influential global education leaders. Check them out at wise-qatar.org and follow the EdUp Experience podcast for more information. Yay! Guys, this is Joe just popping in to ask if you've signed up for your free marketing consultation with MDT Marketing yet. If you haven't, head to mdtmarketing.com/edup, submit your information, get your free consultation today. Don't do it alone. Find the right partner. Welcome back, everybody. This is the EdUp Experience podcast where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio here with you again on another what will be an amazing episode with a returning guest and returning guest host. Two of my favorite people in the entirety of higher education. I want to introduce first to you, actually, before I introduce my guest co-host today, I would like to remind everybody, as you know I like to do, please head to the edupexperience.com and give us a review. We've been kind of pushing it because, of course, it helps to know what you guys think of the EdUp Experience. It helps us iterate as we move forward, whether it's finding innovative guests, whether it's focusing on certain conversations, whether it's whatever it is. We appreciate your feedback, and you can do it right on our website, edupexperience.com. Go to reviews, and then there's a little drop down when you go there, and it says, enter your review, and just boom, put it in there. You don't have to really do anything. You have to go anywhere except our website. It could all be done there. Of course, check out the episodes. I did add, for those of you that this might be your first time listening to the EdUp Experience if you're in higher ed, which I can't believe that it would be because we put out so many episodes and promoted them to absolute death. But if this is your first listening experience of EdUp, or maybe you don't know how to get started with the EdUp Experience because we've had 300, I don't know how many episodes, I put a little section on the website, Elvin and I. It's called Starter Episodes. You can go there and you can click on it, and it gives you 5 episodes to start with that we think might be interesting to you. The first starter pack, as it were, and no, you don't have to pay anything to listen to them, is online learning. We have 5 of the episodes that from the trailblazers of the online learning space that you could click into, listen, and then, hitting my microphone. And then from there, you can explore and see where you want to go next. Speaking of exploring, I have a very inquisitive and organized guest host with me today. You may have heard her from our 300th ever episode of the EdUp Experience. Here she is, ladies and gentlemen. Katelbert, marketing guru and co-author of the forthcoming book that we're writing together, right, Kate?
Yeah, thanks for having me again. So much fun to be here and super excited about the book, but really excited about today's guest.
I got to ask you, how's your writing hand? Do you actually write with a hand? Do you type?
Oh, that's very interesting.
Right?
So I actually just injured my left hand, but I'm right-handed, so that's okay. And I do. So as a professional writer, I like to do all of it. So I do most of it, typing, but I like to sort of switch modalities. So from time to time, I print it all off on 3-hole punched paper and throw it into a binder and walk over to a couch or a table or a different sort of workspace and grab a zillion Post-it notes and tape flags and pens and so go back and forth. It is very ugly. I will slaughter a lot of trees as we get through this book process together. Yikes, yeah, yikes. That's all right. We'll plant one when we're done to celebrate.
Yeah, make sure you nurse your hand, because I certainly can't write this book without you. So you're, whatever you got to do, hand sanitizer, heating pads, take care of where you're, what do you call it when you get carpal tunnel?
All that good stuff. I actually have a hand massaging machine and it's heated. It's very cool. Yeah, just like that.
Yep. Well, good. Well, I'm excited that you're here. We're going to have I think, a great conversation with our guest today. He's been here, like I said, he's been here before. He has a lot to say, and he's got one heck of a new initiative to talk about. Here he is, guys. He's coming right now. Dr. Wallace Pond, founding partner at the Transformation Collaborative. Dr. Pond, welcome back to the EdUp Experience podcast.
Hey, Joe and Kate. Good to be with you guys. And you've progressed since the first time I was on. You have all the sound effects now that you didn't have when I was here the first time. So clearly, you guys are expanding and growing and getting more sophisticated.
Well, I'm working on it. And Wallace, you sound like you might be a little under the weather there. I just want to make sure your voice is okay to hit this episode all the way.
You betcha. We'll be just fine.
All right, good. Well, Wallace, let's start. You've been in higher ed for like 47 years, no, 30 years.
I started when I was 9. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've been in and around, you've worked for universities, you've consulted for universities, you've written many illuminating and important posts, blog posts, articles, and fast forward, you're highly connected within higher ed, and you put together the Transformation Collaborative along with one of your with a partner. What is the Transformation Collaborative? Take a minute, tell us about what it is and how it came to be.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. And I actually have been in higher education, in one way or another for 35, 36 years. And I've had the great fortune of being in public and private higher ed and liberal arts and online and domestic and international. And so I've had a lot of lenses through which to observe sort of what's happened over that period. And more importantly, what's happening over, let's call it, last 10 or 15 years. And there's been more change in the last decade in the environment in which higher ed operates than there's been in the last, call it, 200 years. And as a result, as an industry or as an institution, higher education is facing some issues that really are new, that really haven't, that the industry hasn't faced in its history before. We've had crises and we've had challenges and we've had changes, but the combination of factors that are at play today are actually kind of unprecedented in the history of higher education. And as a result, colleges and universities find themselves, most college universities, not all, there's a small number that are, they're exclusive enough, they're wealthy enough, they're powerful enough. Let's call it 10% of higher education, maybe 8%. They can kind of do whatever they want for the foreseeable future. But there's a really big group of institutions outside of that that find themselves in a situation where kind of the incrementalism of the past, the dinking and dunking around the edges, just doesn't work anymore. And the reason it doesn't work anymore is I mentioned those, that combination of challenges, and this particularly for institutions, what I would call traditional higher education. And when I say traditional higher education, what I mean is credit-bearing, degree-granting schools. I'm not talking about profit status. I'm not talking about campus-based or online. I'm talking about schools whose product is credit-bearing courses that lead to a degree. That has been shaken up more than any other part of what we might call the higher education or the post-secondary ecosystem. And so, with my experience in the space over the last 35 years, it became clear to me that that higher education institutions, even if they were willing, many were not able to engage in the kind of transformation that's actually required. And we can go into some detail during the conversation today about sort of what those external factors are and why transformational change is required, and what that might look like in a lot of colleges and universities. But the short version is the environment has changed so much that there are key things that just can't be done the same way anymore. And the problem is that very few institutions are both willing and able to engage in that reinvention. It's really, really hard work. And very few institutional leaders and even boards have the lived experience, right, of having to run the daily business, manage through disruption, plan for the future, and not just any future, but a transformed future, and then, oh, by the way, implement that. So the Transformation Collaborative is the outcome of extensive conversations over probably a 9-month period with lots of people that I know and respect, both in and out of higher education. This took place on Zoom. It took place on phone calls. It took place via email, with the idea being, if we were going to clean sheet this, how would we do it differently? Both the university side and the service provider side, what we might in the old days have called the consultancy side. If we were going to, and by the way, a global pandemic is probably a good opportunity or a good time to think about that. What would it look like? And what came out of that was the Transformation Collaborative. And it's a fascinating organization that is not a traditional consultancy by any stretch of the imagination. It is an affiliation of professionals and organizations. We're up to, I think, a couple dozen affiliates now, not employees, but these are people that have, similar points of view about transformation. They're world-class functional experts, they're thought leaders, and it allows us to go to market, so to speak, to approach client institutions with this group of people that's really unusual, really unique in the space, so that we can meet whatever the needs are of pretty much any institution, and it's all completely customized. So we don't, have templates of this is how you're going to have to change, Acme Institute or State U or whatever. It's custom designed from the ground up for each institution in its own context. And it really is a resource. It's, when we talked about willing and able, it's the able, right? The Transformation Collaborative is what allows institutions who are willing to reinvent themselves to be able to do that. It's a set of world-class resources, C-suite and board level resources that I'm not really aware of in any other context. So that's about a 5-minute version of a 9-month process that got us to the Transformation Collaborative.
Well, and Kate, I want to kick it over to you to start asking any questions you have, but I think it's important to be transparent that I am a member of the Transformation Collaborative. Wallace, you and I have talked, and I'm listed as an advisor. And I thought it was important, and when you asked me, I thought it was important because I agree with you. I haven't seen any consultancy doing this the same way. And I agree with you in that leadership, and I'm going to say all, I mean, there's some leaders that are very forward thinking and innovative, but by and large boards, some leaders, there's just this missing piece of urgency. It's a missing piece, right? Where the change is happening, it's changing all around us. And what do we do next? And how fast do we need to do it? That's been a missing piece. And I say, why is that? And one of the things that I always come up with, and you've touched on it in some of your blogs, is the retail experience of higher education.
Yes. Yeah.
You can go anywhere to get anything you want. And this, build it and people will come deal doesn't exist anymore. Even regional boundaries are gone, where, somebody would be thinking about, oh, well, I want to attend a school here in my region. Well, they could look in any region in the country and go anywhere that they want if the institution they're looking at has online courses. So there just is a blurring of the lines. And what does that mean for schools that want to compete? You got to get into digital marketing. Are you prepared to do that? Is your website even optimized for SEO? For a lot of traditional institutions don't optimize. And so there's a lack of understanding in those some leaders of how to compete for market share in a digital world, right? That's a big piece.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Joe, that I think in my conversations, and I have, as you can imagine, many, many, many conversations with senior executives in higher education, with board members, with people in the trade press, et cetera. And I would argue that a lot of folks still, particularly on boards, but also in executive suites, still don't quite understand the reality of the situation they find themselves in. In other words, they know that they're hurting. they intuit that something has changed dramatically. They know that things that they used to be didn't work. They know that they're having, for the first time ever, to manage cash, and they've got revenue issues, and enrollment's a problem. They know all that, but they typically don't understand the big picture of how we got here and what external factors are at play. They don't even typically understand, and I don't mean this pejoratively. It's just if you're in an industry or institution that was founded, that was based on a model designed to perpetuate the status quo, that's not an industry that's going to generate a lot of insight, right, outside of the status quo. And so higher education was something that started long ago as the ultimate exclusive activity, right? I mean, even in the United States, where we think of higher education as pretty democratic, less than 10% of Americans went to college, single digits, even before World War II. Incredibly exclusive. And so what's happened over the let's call it 70, 80, 90 years is that higher education has kind of shifted from this uber exclusive activity to a more democratized activity, to an actual retail enterprise. And you mentioned that, just a minute ago when you with your lead in that, and I will tell you, very few people in higher education got into higher education with the intent of being in a retail business. Right. In fact,
so true, right? So true.
In fact, most people in higher education got into it to avoid being in a retail business of any kind, right? Yeah. To not have to use the word marketing or sales or P&L, right?
Or customer.
Absolutely.
Or customer, right? So,
absolutely.
So I damn near got fired when I was working at a medical school and referred to our students as customers. Now, of course, everyone, comes to me for advice about how to treat their students like customers. But back in the day, and for some institutions, you're absolutely right, Wallace. Can I say a couple of complimentary things right here? Because for our listeners who don't know you, what you're doing is really, really remarkable. And I was really sort of taken aback when I started learning about the Transformation Collaborative and became familiar with your mission. And I'm going to quote something from your website because I think it's really phenomenal. When you talk about the Transformation Collaborative has one purpose: to help institutions of higher education survive and thrive now and through the next normal by reinventing themselves for the world they're in, rather than the one in which they were founded. And that was a big wow for me, Wallace, is that I think, I've worked inside higher education, as we all have, and have worked as a consultant to higher education leaders for many, many years myself. And it really is that dissonance between trying to help colleges and universities sort of rise to the occasion of the world in which they're operating in today, and helping them shed all of the things they knew to be true and all of their practices, all that status quo about the world in which they were founded, because their industry has changed. Higher education has changed. Talk a little bit about this work that you've done as a president, because I think that it really sort of, you come to the leadership space and helping colleges and universities, again, having walked in their shoes, having sort of, donned the hat that they don. And so you may know that Joe and I are working on a book right now called Commencement: The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, and it's really informed in large part by the insights of 100+ college and university presidents. So I would love to ask you a really kind of maybe loaded question, but let's talk about college and university presidents. What makes for a really great college or university president today, and maybe how is that different from the past? Or what is the profile of a great academic president look like today?
If you're experiencing any level of marketing challenge right now, you've got to ask the hard questions, and you need answers. Are you using the right mix of channels to get in front of your future students? Is your messaging personalized and delivered in a medium your audience and future students will respond to? And are you spending more time building reporting than listening in on what your students really want? All of these questions will get answered when you sign up for your free consultation with MDT Marketing head to mdtmarketing.com/edup, submit your information, and talk to MDT. Don't go it alone. Find the right partner. The guys at MDT, the team at MDT is absolutely amazing. Whether your challenge is the cost of inquiries, your branding, the bad and incomplete information that come with your inquiries, whatever it is, an audit of your challenges will help your institution, and it's free. mdtmarketing.com/edup.
As a president myself, and I've been a college president 5 or 6 times in different institutions, both in the U.S. and abroad, and I've and had to engage in transformative change 2 or 3 times, not necessarily voluntarily, but I've had to do that in different contexts before we ever got to the pandemic. And what I will tell you is, if the number one difference, if we look at leadership today versus say 15, 20, 30 years ago, and I would say this applies outside of higher education as well, but I'll provide some more specifics here in a minute, is that in the past, higher education leaders were successful by being good stewards of the status quo. That's what it was about, right? You are a faculty member, a department chair, a dean, maybe an associate provost, whatever. You worked your way up, you became a president or a chancellor, and your whole career had been about being a good steward of your piece of the status quo, right? All the way to being, a chief executive. And now it's about being a leader of transformation. Now it's about, and it used to be about success through self and your own technical skills and your own academic skills and knowledge. And now it's about success through others.
100%.
Yeah, that's it.
and so if you and so what does that look like, right? So in higher, for example, in the past, I'll give you a good example. A school would hire a provost. There'd be a provost search, let's call it, and they would hire someone with a great publishing record, and someone who is a well-respected academic in the field, and maybe someone who has demonstrated good faculty relations. All helpful stuff, right? All good stuff. But today, that provost, if you want to thrive, like we say at the Transformation Collaborative, if you want to survive and thrive for the next normal, that provost has to have expertise in product strategy, right? That provost has to have expertise in digital marketing. That provost has to understand the retail customer market. That is a wildly different profile than you would have seen in a provost even 5 years ago, right? And by the way, you would rarely see that kind of language. If you were to go to the Chronicle of Higher Education or higherjobs.com, you would not see those words associated with a provost job description. You might see words like strategic, right, or entrepreneurial, but you wouldn't see the words I used. And as it relates to a university CEO, a president or chancellor, in addition to things like, yes, being able to lead innovation, being able to support an entrepreneurial spirit within the organization, it's really helpful to also have expertise in things like M&A, right? Because a lot of institutions going forward, if they survive in some form, it will be because they made acquisitions, or they were acquired, or they engaged in mergers that allowed the business model to be viable when it wasn't before. M&A is not a typical technical skill that you associate with a college president. I would add to that, one last thing I would say is, it's really, really, really become about people leadership, right? It's become about leaders who get that the people in the organization are this really sacred thing, this humanity, this human capital, that working together and collectively can do things and can achieve things that no one can achieve by themselves, right? And so a huge difference in higher education leadership today is the extent to which leaders can empower other people in the organization to innovate, to take risks. And that's a big ask, right? Because, and I think you'll agree with this, Joe, when we think of higher education, we don't think of high risk environments.
Yeah, definitely.
I gave the example of, the person who comes up and becomes the chancellor or the president by coming up through the ranks. Typically in traditional higher education, not only were those individuals not rewarded for taking risk, right? They got to the highest levels because they didn't take risk, right?
Yeah.
They got to the highest levels because they played it safe. Well, that's a huge mismatch now for what institutions need, because they need leaders who are not only not risk averse, they need leaders who have an incredibly high tolerance for risk, for ambiguity, for making tough decisions in the absence of data. And that's not a typical or traditional higher education leadership profile.
Let me, and Kate, before you ask your next question, I want to say, Wallace, and you'll think this will resonate with you. I wrote an article for Fierce Education, and I laid out what I thought were the critical traits for the next generation of higher education leaders, or this generation of higher education leaders. And the 5 points that I said were, number one, expertise in marketing, enrollment, and brand. I don't think you can survive as a leader in higher ed without that knowledge, right? Because you're always going to be positioning.
Right.
An entrepreneurial mindset, social media savvy. And the reason I say that is because one way to organically grow an institution these days is to be an out front and open leader, to write, to be, you don't have to take pictures of yourself mowing your lawn, but you can put yourself out on social media to be transparent. You have functional structures and operating models. Got to be an expert. Got to understand how to, like you said, mergers, acquisitions, opportunities, change. And then lastly, authenticity. And that's that people leadership piece, right? You have to be an authentic leader. You have to be perceived that you're doing what's in the best interest of the student amid mounting debt problems, public distrust, tuition, questions about tuition costs. You have to be really authentic. If they don't believe you as a leader, they're not going to come to your school. I mean, the students and parents and adults. It doesn't matter what kind of higher education student you're talking about. That's what I laid out, and I just go, who is this person? I mean, these are the leaders of the future in a highly digital retail marketplace of higher education, like you're saying.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, Joe. And for anybody who wants to look at this a little more deeply, if you want to go to my own website, which is wallacecapon.com, under the leadership tab, I have a couple of blogs or articles that are dedicated specifically in much more detail to what the sort of new or contemporary higher education leader, what that profile looks like. And I would add a couple of things to what you said. And it's hard, right? I mean, this is a lot of stuff to ask of individual leaders.
Absolutely.
And I would say, if it's not an individual person, at least it's a leadership team,
yep.
Right? That has these collectively. But I don't think either one of us used the word necessarily strategic, but I think that it goes without saying that higher education leaders today, of course, they need to be strategic, but strategic it doesn't mean the same thing today that it meant in the past. In the past, strategic meant getting everyone together once every 2 years for the strategic plan. That's kind of what strategic meant. I'm talking about strategic in terms of a mindset, right? When I say strategic, I'm talking about an individual who can make decisions and who can allocate resources and can support folks in the organization towards things like sustainability, relevance. Are you going to be here in 8 years, and are you going to matter? Because one of the things that I think is going to happen is a lot of institutions are going to technically survive, right? They're not actually going to close the doors, but they're going to be zombie schools, right? They're not going to have the resources to do anything new or interesting. They're going to be surviving, with a revenue model that's highly challenged and really inadequate. And so for leaders today, when I say you have to be strategic, it's, you can spend $1 that's just going to come off the bottom line, or you can spend $1 that's going to return $1.50, or that's going to support partnerships, or that's going to build another revenue stream, right? That's what I mean when I talk about strategic. It's not about the strategic plan or the self-study that you've had to do for 100 years to get your accreditation sign off. I would also say that folks today have to be really emotionally and culturally intelligent. And you use the word authenticity. I'd go a step further, Joe, and say they need to embrace vulnerability. And the reason they need to embrace vulnerability, I use the word humanity. When we talk about people and organizations, even colleges, we use terms like personnel or employees or staff, or faculty. But the word that I think leaders have to get is humanity, right? All of these people collectively represent humanity in the organization. And as a leader, what are you going to do to support the wellness and the resilience and the empowerment of humanity in the organization? And that's a very different kind of task than we would have talked about in the past.
Kate.
Wow, this is powerful, guys. So one of the things I think might be important to reiterate for our listeners as they're listening to these really brilliant insights from Wallace and built upon by Joe around sort of what great leadership used to look like in higher education and what is required of leaders today, and sort of that difference, right? The success through self versus success through others, success by being a good steward of the status quo versus being a leader of transformation. I think it's important for listeners who are currently working inside of higher education. They're, they're a director, they're a VP, they're a sort of associate provost, et cetera. And they might be thinking, oh my gosh, but I'm that left column, right? Like I've played it safe. I've reported to a boss all these years who've told me, and to a board that has said, just do it how we've always done it. And this is our mission. And this is how we do this. And they're thinking, does this mean that I'm no longer employable? Does this mean that and I think the word you just said a minute ago, Wallace, that's really important for our listeners to really hear is mindset. We can change our minds.
Yeah, and I would also argue, Kate, so thanks for saying that, but not only is there an opportunity for folks to evolve, right, as leaders, and we evolve in lots of ways. But there's also an opportunity to engage in that kind of leadership in even highly compartmentalized ways. So I want to be clear, you don't have to be in the C-suite to do this, right? You don't have to be a senior executive to do this. As a program chair in a small department, or an assistant chair, as a committee head on a faculty committee, there are ways to do this in your universe, right? It is possible, for example, to support risk-taking, among the faculty in your department. It is possible to resource experimentation and innovation within your universe. It doesn't have to be at the organizational level. It can be at whatever level you're at. And in fact, I would argue that even if you are line staff, right, or junior faculty, that there are ways that you can implement, that you can integrate this kind of leadership thinking into the work that you do. Now, it's also, I also want to be clear that culture is a monster, right? that is really powerful, and just chews up and spits out, you know, people and strategy and whatever. So we, you know, to be realistic, there are certain situations that are not going to be particularly supportive, right, of individuals who choose to be innovative or experimental or risk-taking, or even, you know, there are a lot of cultures that don't support empowering people, right, because they don't want to distribute control. They don't want to distribute power or resources. They want to hold it in a centralized, close to the vest way. So I'm not naive. I understand that some environments are operationally and culturally more amenable to the kinds of behavior that we're talking about, Kate. But I would also argue that most environments, right, have wiggle room, and in some cases a lot of room, for people at all levels and in, you know, at all level of compartmentalization to begin to think differently and to implement, to actually behave differently in kind of the ways that we've described.
So what does this mean for all this mean for the Transformation Collaborative? How, so two questions, Wallace.
Yeah.
So far, if you look at the spectrum of higher ed issues that institutions might have, how are you pointing the Transformation Collaborative? Are you pointing it at boards? Are you pointing it at the president as a leadership teams? How are you positioning, and what might those issues be that people are interested in going, okay, we might need some help? And then secondarily to that, what's the overall engagement process look like? If an institution is thinking right now, hey, look, this sounds pretty good. I need to take a step and contact Wallace and crew over at Transformation Collaborative. What do I do? How do I do it?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question and the opportunity to share that information, Joe. So thank you. First of all, I would say that, you know, if you just want to learn more about the Transformation Collaborative, go to www.transformationcollaborative.net. And you can, and we go into great detail. You know, one of the positions we've taken with the TC that is very unlike past organizations is we don't take a proprietary perspective on what we do or how we do it. You know, it's all out there for everyone to see. You know, we put our entire process, you know, on the website for anyone to see. We tend to believe that the people in the organization and our experience and our point of view is what brings value. But you know, our assessment tools, you know, everything is available to anyone who wants to have a look at it. Having said that, okay, the way I would describe kind of how this works is first of all, institutions typically get the sense one way or another that what they've been doing forever isn't working nearly as well as it was or it needs to, right? And we, you know, institutions reach out to us. We sometimes reach out to them because we know someone in the organization or we've read about them. But the initial interaction typically comes from organizations who have recognized that what they're doing isn't working, that small incremental changes around the edges are not going to be adequate, but they have significant questions about their capacity to actually transform or reinvent themselves. It's really, really hard work and it's really rare. So that's where the conversation tends to start, is how can the Transformation Collaborative be the able in the willing and able? And I will tell you, in some cases, it's also how do we help shift to the willing? Because one of the things we sometimes do with organizations, Joe, and we do this at no cost typically, is we will just do a high-level assessment in the organization of their actual capacity for transformational change, right? What about your operation, your leadership, your culture will either support reinvention or not? And that is a really helpful baseline of information for institutions to really have better self-awareness than they typically do
It's got to be
about
a
their.
shocker, I bet, sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because everybody thinks, right? Everybody thinks they're ready for transformational change.
Yeah.
Not everybody is.
Absolutely not. We have another assessment that we do if after the capacity for change assessment, which is very helpful to the institution and to the TC, that helps a dialogue, right? That forms a baseline for dialogue, which is, okay, either we have to work on your capacity first, or we believe there's enough capacity for change there to go to the second step. And so we have a two-channel assessment. One is the capacity for change, and the other is institutional risk, right? It's very comprehensive. Most schools have never gone through anything like it. It's not like a check the box thing for accreditation or whatever. It's across 8 domains, culture and leadership and finance and learning models, and that institutional risk assessment provides a really comprehensive look at where the institution's risks and opportunities are, right? And because we're the transformational collaborative versus a more traditional consultancy, we don't focus on the transactional stuff, right? We say, okay, across strategy or culture or institutional capacity to do anything, right? Operations, the business model, leadership and governance, where are your greatest risks? Where are your greatest opportunities? And then we work with the institution to create the transformation plan based upon that knowledge, right? And then we continue. This is also very different than the typical consultancy. We built, when we were talking about what works and doesn't work in the traditional model, right? And if we were going to clean sheet this, what would be different? What everyone tends to agree upon, both on the client side and the consultancy side, is that consultants are terrible when it comes to execution or accountability, right? They're very good at putting together the packet, the plan, the deck, the presentation, cashing the check and moving on to the next client. They're really bad at helping the client actually implement the plan, execute, and they're also nowhere to be seen when it comes to being accountable for results. And so one really big difference with the Transformation Collaborative is we're there through execution and accountability as well. And we own that at the same level that the leadership in the organization does. And I'll tell you, that's a new thing on the client side as well, right? Institutions appreciate it, but they're not used to it. And so part of the TC model is it's a long-term engagement, right? Our goal isn't to help you increase your lead conversion rate by, 30 basis points. That's not what we do. There are people who do that, right? Highly successful transactional consultants that can come in, we don't, tweak your student information system or help you with a reporting compliance problem, in career services. We have expertise in that, and we can build that into something we call operational excellence. But we don't bring value doing that stuff. We bring value by being a long-term partner to reinvent yourself. And so it's not a 90-day engagement. It's a 2-year, 3-year, sometimes longer engagement where we bring the resources and the expertise of the Transformation Collaborative to bear on that partnership over the entire period. So that's another way that the TC is quite different in the way it operates and the way it brings value to clients.
I love it. Kate, do you have any other questions for Wallace? Because I think we've got one more, and I'm going to ask him if you have another one, though. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a big one, but we'll challenge you to sort of address it
Okay.
sort of quickly in our time left. So one of the things that I've seen you write about in blog posts and here, there, and everywhere that was sort of a big light bulb, I think, is thinking about the difference between the fact that higher education, as it is currently defined, is shrinking, while post-secondary education is growing. And could you talk about that for a minute, about that sort of mindset shift, and about maybe even to provide an example maybe of an organization that you think understands the difference between traditional higher ed versus post-secondary education, and sort of how to focus on providing educational experiences for a larger market that's growing?
Sure, you bet. So,
And Wallace, within
yeah.
that, why don't you answer the last question, which is what's the future of higher ed look like, and kind of do them together, because I think that'll be a natural thing.
Okay. Okay, sure. So, I had an epiphany myself some years ago that that traditional higher education, the credit bearing degree granting Title IV model had limited growth opportunity and was actually declining. And we know, by the way, that from an enrollment perspective, that higher education has been in an 11-year decline. And the last 2 years were the biggest 2 years of decline ever in higher education. It's substantial. However, if we think of the post-secondary ecosystem, that's everything else, right? It's everything after high school or a GED, everything that happens in industry, on-the-job training, Amazon courses, Google courses. It's everything outside of the credit-bearing degree granting Title IV. And there are 5 or 6 primary, let's call categories: government, industry, higher education, the traditional part, that when you put them all together, B2B, that end up being this post-secondary ecosystem. And 4 of those 6 are growing. The 2 that are shrinking are traditional higher education and government. And government is going to rebound, right? So that shrinkage will be temporary, which means that there will be opportunity in 5 of the 6 categories of post-secondary education for institutions that are willing to see that as a potential market, right? That are willing to engage students in programs that may be partnered with industry, that may be industry certifications, that may be short-term boot camps. These can be revenue generating programs, and they can even be stacked vertically, right, within other programs that are credit bearing and degree granting. And in fact, some interesting research recently came out from Strata Education, in which the highest value education programs, in other words, when you look at how alumni benefit from having done a program, it could have been a Google course or an Amazon course in project management. It could have been an associate degree, whatever. When they research thousands and thousands and thousands of alumni about what were, it met my needs, it helped me in my work, it was profitable in terms of salary, et cetera. The most powerful education program that people can take is a degree program with a non-degree program that is very career skill specific. And in fact, even the non-degree career programs are more valuable than, say, associate degrees. It's really interesting research. So institutions who are, again, willing and able to think about that post-secondary ecosystem versus traditional higher education, there is significant opportunity. And you asked Kate about some institutions, that are models for that. I think that there are a couple different institutions I can point to that are models in very different ways. So one example might be Southern New Hampshire University, which has gone whole hog into industry partnership programs. They've also have explored, different delivery modalities than they used to have. They have both credit-bearing and non-credit-bearing programs. If you look at, say, Western Governors University, they do primarily competency-based education, but that leads to credit bearing and degree education, but in a very different way than traditional universities. You can get to the same credit and the same degree with far less class time because of it being competency based. But where the huge growth is in non-college institutions, okay? And what I mean by that is, an Amazon, a Google, those kinds of institutions, next, even Netflix and 2U in partnership, those are the institutions that have scale, they have unbelievable resources, and it looks like employers are going to accept the credentials. And they're blowing up both the degree model and the tuition model at the same time. Because they're non-degree and they're typically, subscription based, $49 a month or something. And then after 3 months, you get your, Amazon project management certificate or whatever. So I think that institutions that are willing to really aggressively partner with industry are going to be able to grow and are going to be advantaged. And when I say aggressively partner, I mean, speaking of something that's different from the old to the new, actually giving up control of curriculum, right? And having curriculum come directly from industry based upon industry needs, not from faculty, right? It doesn't mean that faculty don't have a role in sort of validating the curriculum, but what it means is the people who will pay for this, both students and industry, that's the customer, not the faculty. And so, speaking of it being a retail business, creating products and services that the customer base actually wants is an element of how this is shifting to more of a retail business.
Wow. Love it. Great question, Kate. Wallace, you knocked it out of the park as usual, my friend. What's the website, Transformation Collaborative, again, just for our audience?
Yeah, it's www.transformationcollaborative, all one word, transformationcollaborative.net.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Kate, first to you, thank you for joining another episode of the EdUp Experience, my esteemed and amazing co-author. And Kate, what's the title of our book? I don't think we've actually said it on a podcast before, but you did say it earlier today, which means it makes it okay.
Yeah, we haven't officially announced it yet, but you heard it here first, guys. The title of the book is Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education Through the Eyes of 100 plus college and university presidents.
Yeah, we got a lot of good stuff out of these themes from the podcast, and we're going to synthesize it all. I say we, I mean Kate, with my help is mostly what I mean. But that's very important. It'll be really foundational to, I think, how higher ed moves forward. So thank you so much, Kate, for joining.
Of course, Wallace, you're amazing. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you today.
You're so kind, Kate. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Dr. Wallace K. Pond. Thank you again for coming on the EdUp Experience. Make sure we can't help but stay in touch because I'm on the Transformation Collaborative. So if you want to hear from me, you got to go to the Transformation Collaborative. If you want to hear from Wallace, you got to go to the Transformation Collaborative. You will not be sorry. Just look at the team. Go to the website and look where it says it takes a team, and look at the thought leaders, advisors, and engagers that you would have access to as a part of this collaborative. Wallace, thank you for coming on so much. It's been a pleasure.
You betcha. Take care, Joe, and take care, Kate.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of the EdUp Experience. You've just EdUp'd. Are you using the right mix of channels to get in front of your audience? Is your messaging personalized and delivered in a medium your audience responds to? Are you spending more time building reports than listening in on what your audience wants? These are not easy questions to answer. That's why our great friends at MDT Marketing are offering a free audit of your marketing efforts. Head to www.mdtmarketing.com/edup and submit your information for your free consultation today. Look, guys, you got nothing to lose. It's free. I don't know why you wouldn't want a free audit to tell you what you're doing, whether it's effective, and how you can make some incremental changes that can make a big difference moving forward. That's www.mdtmarketing.com/edup.